Okay, so let us start from today. Now, he is talking about the separation of the consciousness from the mind. But let us start from the body. Okay, the separation of the consciousness from the body is much easier, no? Because we can look at the body and objectively see. Sometimes you have a cut or a pain somewhere, so you can see it as something separate from yourself. You don't think that that is me. At different times, you do feel that the body is me, but the separation is possible at the body level. Now, what about the vital level, the emotional level? That is more difficult. You get angry, but you realize that you have become angered a little later. But when you are getting angry, is it possible to see that, oh, anger is coming in me and I'm looking at my anger? That's more difficult. Okay, but still, it is sometimes when you are even getting angry, there is a feeling that I should not get angry. That means there is some sort of objective look on the anger. But in thought, Sendhu is saying it is very difficult. So now we start reading the para that we have to read today. In thought, okay, page 546. In thought, separation of the thinker and the thinking is more difficult. It is possible only when you go to the higher mind level, the spiritual mind, where you are completely separated. Then you can see, oh, the thinking is going on in the mind, and I am not thinking. I am quiet, calm, and quiet. That's the experience of the self. So this is what he's saying. In thought, separation of the thinker and the thinking is more difficult. The thinker is plunged and lost in the thought or carried in the thought current, okay? Identified with it. It is not usually at the time of or in the very act of thinking that he can observe or review his thoughts. He has to do that in retrospect and with the aid of memory and by critical pause. Just 1 second. And by a critical pause of corrective judgment before he proceeds further. So that's exactly what we have discussed. You can remember it afterwards. And then you can also have a corrective judgment. Oh, my thought was wrong. I should have thought like this. The same thing is also possible with the emotions. Afterwards, it is possible to have a corrective action. But the corrective action is not at all very common. 90% of humanity justify their anger, justify their jealousy, justify this present state of thinking. But there's a script is using the word very clearly, a critical pause of corrective judgment. You do objectively look at your emotions and say it should not have happened. And then you think how to correct that before he proceeds further. But still, a simultaneity of thinking and conscious direction of the mind's action can be achieved partially when the thought does not engross, entirely when the thinker acquires the faculty of stepping back into the mental self. Mental self, not spiritual, not the self, but the mental self. That is a normal consciousness. What we will call mental Purusha. Okay? Manomaya Purusha. Okay, and standing back there apart from the mental energy. So even in our normal condition of ignorance, some sort of review of the thought process is possible even while it is happening step by step. Simultaneity of thinking is possible, but partially only, not fully. Think can be achieved partially when the thought does not engross. Engross means you are absolutely, thinker and thought are completely identified. Entirely when the thinker acquires the faculty of stepping back into the mental self and standing apart there from the mental energy. Instead of being absorbed in the thought with at most a vague feeling of the process of thinking, We can see the process by mental vision. Watch our thoughts in their origination and movement. Origination and movement, and partly by silent insight, partly by a process of thought upon thought. So thought upon thought is possible at our level. There is no thought upon thought in the spiritual plane. Okay? Judge them and evaluate them. This is very interesting what is saying. Process of thought upon thought. My thought was wrong, and this thought itself is a thought. Okay, very interesting. Judge, and you can judge the thought and evaluate them. This is half true, this is quite true, this is not true. We can evaluate the thought by examining it objectively. Normally, it is done afterwards, after the thought, but simply saying partially it can be done even when you are in the ignorance, level 1. Okay? Partly by a process of thought. So that's what. But whatever the kind of identification, that means to say it can be full or it can be half or even quarter. Whatever the kind of identification, it is to be noted that this knowledge of our internal movements is of a double nature. The knowledge of the internal movements and our recognition and understanding the emotions and thoughts. Knowledge of the internal movements is of a double nature, separation and direct contact. Okay? So there is a separation and a direct contact. So what is direct contact mean? We will have a look at that. Okay? For even when we detach ourselves, this close contact is maintained. Okay? Even when you separate yourself. So we are saying that even when we separate ourselves fully, there is somewhere a connection between the consciousness that is watching the thought, and there is a vague feeling that this is my thought, it's not somebody else's thought. Huh? Even when you are in the spiritual plane of consciousness, you are seeing the thoughts, but they are your thoughts. They are not other people's thoughts. That's why he's saying close contact, he's using the word. Okay. Of course, you can see other people's thoughts also when you are in that condition, but then it is their thought and not your thought. You don't confuse them to be yours. The confusion between other thoughts and your thoughts can come in the cosmic consciousness. Okay? In the cosmic consciousness, somebody else's thought is somebody else's thought, but it's also mine. Both the things are there in the cosmic consciousness. You see the other person, you know that he is separate from you, yet he is part of you. Okay, so that's what Sarada is pointing out here. This close contact is maintained. Our knowledge is always based on a direct touch, on a cognition by direct awareness, carrying in it a certain element of identity. So, directly when you are looking at yourself, it is direct touch. When you are looking at your anger or your thought, you are not using your senses. You are using only the memory. So that's what Sarada means by direct contact. Because in the outside world, when I'm trying to see a tree or I'm trying to see, so many of you are there, if I'm trying to see you, whether it is Yasmin or Sumati or Shilpa or Kiran or Archana Devi, I'm using my senses. But when I'm looking at my own thoughts and emotions, I'm not using senses. So that's why we're saying direct, okay, direct contact. Clear, no? So you see how important the word is. Direct contact means indirect contact is through the senses, right? So our knowledge is always based on a direct touch, on a cognition of direct awareness, carrying in it a certain element. By the way, remember the beginning, okay? He has told you that the inner, okay, the very act of thinking and memory, they are the inner things that he's talking about. He's not talking about the outer. Outer means I am seeing others, that's it. So, in a certain element of identity. The more separative attitude is ordinarily the method of our reason in observing and knowing our inner movements. The more intimate is the method of our dynamic part of mind associating itself with our sensations, feelings, desires. So, the more separative attitude is ordinarily the method of our reason. When your reason is examining your own thinking or your emotions or your desires, there is a evaluation of the desire, evaluation of the emotion, and evaluation. So that evaluation can come only when you are separated. It's a well-known fact that when I'm identified with something, my judgment is never correct. If I have a friend who is very, very close to me, I will always tend to support him even in his wrong actions because you are identifying yourself with him. And when it is somebody else, yourself, when it is somebody else, it is part identification. But when it is yourself, it is full identification. Okay. So that is there too. But when reason is looking at your own emotions and your thoughts, there is a more separative, he's saying separative. But in this, where is it gone? The more separative thought, not the word more. There is always both the things are there, identification as well as separation. But when the reason comes in, it becomes more separative. You are more objective about your own thoughts and feelings. 90% of humanity is not objective. They go and justify themselves. But the more separative attitude is when reason is observing emotions and thoughts and knowing our inner movements. The more intimate is the method of our dynamic part of mind associating itself with this emotion, sensations, feelings, and desires. Okay? So he's telling you very clearly, when he's saying the more intimate and the more separated, he is contrasting the two. Okay? The more separated means separation between thinker and thought. The more intimate means identification with thinker and thought. Intimate. You can't be intimate with separation. Okay, that's it. So how interesting the words are, and you go behind the words and you will see the Srimli is dealing with both the attitudes, a separative attitude and an identificatory attitude. But he is using the word intimate. Okay. The more intimate is the method of our dynamic part of mind. Okay. The dynamic part of mind is the vital mind. Okay. Associating itself with our sensations, feelings, and desires. But in this association too, the thinking mind can intervene and exercise a separated, dissociated observation and control over both the dynamic self-associating part of mind and the vital or physical movement. In other words, he's saying that there is a whole gradation. There is a total identification possible with body, life, mind, but there is a separating also possible, and even in that separateness, there is a gradation. Okay, the absolute separativeness is only in the spiritual plane of consciousness, the self. But when you are in your normal condition also, a little bit of separation is possible. When reason starts, you start evaluating your own thoughts and your own emotions. So Srende is explaining all this very clearly, but we have to go behind the words. Okay? But in this association means non-separation. You are associating something means you are identified with something. This association too, the thinking mind can intervene and exercise a separated, dissociated observation. Not the words. Association means identification with thought and emotion. Separative association. In that association also, they is saying the thinking mind can intervene and exercise what? A separative, dissociated observation. Separation. Okay? So, he's telling you all sorts of things. He says each one has to judge for himself. And not only dissociated observation, but even control, he's saying, over both the dynamic, self-associating part of mind and the vital and the physical movement. In other words, even when you start getting angry, you can stop yourself. That's an experience that almost everybody can have. You are about to start shouting at somebody, but then you control it. That's what they say. Okay. Control. Not only separate it, but also control over the, and which part is doing that? The dynamic part of mind, which is the vital mind. Okay, that's what it's saying. Dynamic means it has the power to stop. All the observable movements of our physical being also are known and controlled by us in both these ways. In both the ways, separative and also identificative, associative and separative, both. All the observable movements of our physical being, body, mind, life, also are known and controlled by us in both the ways, the separative and the intimate. There is a whole gradation. We feel the body and what it is doing intimately as part of us. But the mind is separate from it and can exercise a detached control over its movements. You can look at your own body and say, okay, I got injured yesterday because of that. So you are looking at it. Then you think that you should not do that dangerous thing which caused you the injury. So saying, but the mind is separate from it and can exercise a detached control over its movements. So next time you are in that danger, the mind will tell you, don't do that. You will get injured again, your body will suffer. This gives to our normal knowledge of our subjective being and nature incomplete and largely superficial, though it still is, yet so far as it goes, a certain intimacy, immediacy, and directness. So he's saying it is possible to have both. Okay, he said that earlier also. Although it is the subjective being is your inner thoughts and emotions, and even the body, subjective and nature, incomplete. Normal knowledge is incomplete and largely superficial, though it still is, yet so far as it goes, a certain intimacy, immediacy, and directness. Both the things are possible. That is absent in our knowledge of the world outside us. So now he is telling you there is a huge difference between studying your own emotions and thoughts and knowing the thoughts and emotions of others. Okay? This capacity to look into yourself, partly subjective, partly dissociative, it is absent totally in our knowledge of the world outside us, okay, and its movements and objects. It is completely, you don't know anything about the other person is thinking or emoting. Okay. You can judge to a certain extent by the expression, but that's only guesswork. Okay. So that is absent in our knowledge of the world outside us and its movements and objects. For there, simply explaining why. For there, the thing seen or experienced is not self. It is not subjective, it is objective. It is not experienced as part of us. No entirely direct contact of consciousness with the object is possible. An instrumentation of sense has to be used, which offers us not immediate intimate knowledge of it, but a figure of it as a first datum for knowledge. So when you know yourself, you don't need to use senses. That's why it is direct. And when you are looking at the outside world, you have to use senses. Because suppose the senses are not there, you don't even see the other person, you don't even hear him, you don't even know anything about him. So that is, we have to use senses. Nature is very kindly given us senses so that we can experience partly, imperfectly, the outside world. That's what it's saying. Okay? So you can see we went into detail to see his use of words and how, what he's saying. Subjectively, to sum up, subjectively, we can, to a certain extent, separate ourselves from our thoughts and emotions, but only imperfectly, not fully. But in the outside world, we know nothing. Okay. But when you go to the level 2, then you can know the other's thoughts. And level 2, even a cosmic consciousness is possible, where even the outside world and outside persons, you know fully well, you identify yourself with them. That is the cosmic consciousness. That will come to later on. Okay, so now let's read the next para. 23, we have time. About 15 minutes.
I'm reading, Rangada.
Yeah, please do. Read.
In the cognition of external things, our knowledge has an entirely separative basis. Its whole machinery and process are of the nature of an indirect perception. We do not identify ourselves with external objects, not even with other men, though they are beings of our own nature. We cannot enter into their existence as if it were our own. We cannot know them and their movements with the directness, immediateness, intimacy with which we know, even though incompletely, ourselves and our movements. But not only identification lacks, direct contact also is absent. There is no direct touch between our consciousness and their consciousness, our substance and their substance, our self of being and their self being. The only seemingly direct contact with them or direct evidence we have of them is through the senses. Sight, hearing, touch seem to initiate some kind of a direct intimacy with the object of knowledge. But this is not so really, not a real directness, a real intimacy. For what we get by our sense is not the inner or intimate touch of the thing itself, but an image of it or a vibration or nerve message in ourselves through which we have to learn to know it. These means are so ineffective, so exiguous in their poverty that if that were the whole machinery, we could know little or nothing or only achieve a great blur of confusion. But there intervenes a sense mind intuition which seizes the suggestion of the image or vibration and equates it with the object, a vital intuition which seizes the energy or vigor or power of the object to another kind of a vibration created by the sense contact, and an intuition of the perceptive mind which at once forms a right idea of the object from all this evidence. Whatever is deficient in the interpretation of the image thus constructed is filled up by the intervention of the reason or the total understanding intelligence. If the first composite intuition were the result of a direct contact, or if it summarized the action of a total intuitive mentality, master of its perceptions, there would be no need for the intervention of the reason except as a discoverer or organizer of knowledge not conveyed by the sense and its suggestions. It is, on the contrary, an intuition working on an image, a sense document, an indirect evidence, not working upon a direct contact of consciousness with the object. But since the image or vibration is a defective and summary documentation, and the intuition itself limited and communicated through an obscure medium, acting in a blind light, the accuracy of our intuitional, interpretative construction of the object is often to question or at least likely to be incomplete. Sorry. Construction of the object is open to question or at least likely to be incomplete. Man has had perforce to develop his reason in order to make up for the deficiencies of his sense instrumentation, the fallibility of his physical mind's perceptions, and the paucity of its interpretation of its data.
Yeah. Okay. So now he's talking mostly of the incomplete knowledge of the physical world. Okay. So that's what he's saying. So again, we will do one thing. We will look at the summary of what he's saying. Then it becomes easier to understand, and then we can look at all the words that he's using so that it becomes clear. Okay. Yeah. So now what he's saying in this para, just 1 second. Yeah. What he's saying in the para is like this. Oh, I'm very mistaken. Just 1 minute. Thank you. Yeah. So Shirley is saying now, we have discussed knowledge by identity by the example of our understanding our own thoughts and emotions. We cannot have the same type of knowledge about the external world because we are cut off from it materially, emotionally, and mentally. We have no knowledge of the physical world. That's completely separate. We cannot identify ourselves with other humans in spite of similarity of nature. We know not their inner thoughts or emotions as we know our own, however incompletely. The only link with the external world is through our senses, and these convey very partial and defective information to us. We know not externals except by their images in our sense mind, which receives sense data through ear, eye, nose, etc. This is very similar to the reception of images in a camera. Okay, we have a vital mind and reason which fill in information otherwise lacking from the manas. Man relates image to corresponding corresponding object because of mental intuition. Okay? Example of this is we recognize a voice and identify the man, which a tape recorder cannot do, nor can the camera relate image to external object. It's a little complicated, but we'll discuss this. Very interesting. Okay. Okay, to explain this, I can immediately say, give the example of a baby. Okay. A baby's senses are all working. He sees his mother, he sees her speak, he even feels her touch, but he understands nothing. He doesn't even know that this is his mother. He hears the words, but he doesn't know what they mean. So you need another capacity to be able to, so you have to learn. So you use the word learn. We look at that. It's very interesting. So he has to learn to interpret these images, okay, which were in the beginning absolutely make no sense to him. It is very similar to the spy cameras in the sky, 300 miles above the earth. The spy camera is taking a picture. Let us say it's taking a picture. America wants to know what's going on in Russia. So they take their satellite camera picture, they take a picture. Now that picture is transmitted to the center in America. And so what do you see? You may see only a line, because 300 miles up, you can't make out the difference between a road and a river. You will not be able to make out, but you will see a line. So now there are experts who will be able to interpret these images. Okay, you need interpretations. Otherwise, that makes no sense. Suppose you see a building, whether that building is a hangar keeping planes, or whether it's a very big barnyard, or it's a stable for horses, you're not able to make out. But these people who are there, they can understand because they've studied and they have learned the process. So exactly in the same way, one has to learn to interpret the images. Okay? That's what Sarve is saying here. Then, if there were only a composite intuition with direct contact with external objects, reason would not be needed, because then the intuition would be the interpreter of the images and reason would not be needed. But we do need reason to interpret. Okay, that's what he's saying. Reason would not be needed. This is what happens in the self. When you are in the self, there's a direct contact between, you can see the emotions of others, you can see the thoughts of others. You don't need the senses. And therefore, you don't need the reason also. There's no reason they're working. Reason is a faculty of the mind. When you are in level 2 of the self, the nirvana consciousness or the Brahman consciousness, there's no need, because you are seeing everything directly without senses. Okay? So, if there were only a composite intuition with direct contact with external object, reason would not be needed. This is what happens in the self. Neither reason nor gross senses would be necessary. There is in the self a direct contact with external objects without intervention of gross senses and reason, because mind has become silent. And if the mind has become silent, where is the question of reason? This type of knowledge gives a much more complete picture. So in the physical world, we are using our senses, and the senses have to be interpreted by the sense manas, the mind. But in the self, level 2, this is not necessary at all, because we are directly contacting the thing to be known. But in our normal waking consciousness, since direct contact is absent and we have to use indirect contact of the gross senses, the supplementary filling in of information on the sense data is necessary. Yet it is open to question for accuracy and verity. Okay? This is what happens with animals who depend entirely on sense knowledge. Okay? This is very interesting. A cat or a dog or even a monkey looking at its own reflection in the mirror does not understand what it is. Okay, it is seeing the image, and the interpretation is wrong. It is thinking that there is another monkey behind the mirror. So you will see, it will go behind the mirror to see. Nobody is there. It comes again. Again, he sees his own reflection. But he is misinterpreting. That's why I'm saying is at the animal level. He is misinterpreting. He is thinking that there is another monkey, and he goes behind the mirror. So this is a very interesting game. This is what happens with animals who depend entirely on sense knowledge. But man's reason corrects the knowledge of the senses. This is what we're saying in the pattern. Okay? Very interesting discussion. And I gave examples to we could understand what he is saying. So it's 8:35. So we have done this. Now we'll have to discuss this tomorrow. Tomorrow is the Thursday, and Thursday is a Life Divine class. So we'll look at this para tomorrow. Okay? But we have understood basically what he's saying. Now we look at the words he is using. I insist on the words because when you are reading Sri Lanka by yourself, you have understood the use of words, so it becomes much easier to understand. Okay? So when he's talking of separative knowledge and direct knowledge, he's using the words intimacy, association. So all these words, they mean the same thing. So you have to stretch your imagination a little bit and see. Association, okay, a contact. Intimacy, not possible without a direct touch. So all these ways you have to understand the use of words in Sri. Okay? So tomorrow we will do this para again. Okay? So okay, you have to note down page 5.
Yes, I'll make a note.
Yeah, 547.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay, au revoir everybody. Have a
Au
nice
revoir. Thank you, Rangada.
Thank you, Rangada.
Okay.
Thank you, Rangada.
Okay.